This week, we are reading some more stories from Korean military. I already read some and explained the life in the Korean military in my past episodes. If you missed them, I'll leave the link in the description. To briefly sum up, every healthy young man in South Korea is subject to the mandatory military service due to the ongoing North Korean situation. Currently for about 18 months, but in the past up to 3 years. It's quite a radical change and shock to many, away from their family, freedom as a civilian, and cut away from the outer world. Corruption, abuse, and injustice can happen any part of the society, but the intransparent and strictly hierarchical nature of the military tends to make it much more blunt and absurd. That is the basis why so many stories from the military float around the internet. For many, no other time period in their life stands out weirder and more story-worthy. The world of its own nature of military stories can be a bit tricky to follow for those who didn't experience it. One reason I don't read them on my channel very often. But it would help if you imagine the life in a boarding school or strict summer camp type of setting and double and triple the experience for both positives and negatives. So, here are 6 allegedly true stories from Korean military. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by a host, Anthony. I served in an army base in Pocheon for my military service. That particular base was notorious for taking frequent field training and war games. And that day too, we were out in a local mountain for an overnight line defense training. It didn't involve any active attack or marching, but simply staying put at our posts, so the atmosphere was rather relaxed. I was then but a private second class. Past midnight, senior soldier ordered me to go down to the village nearby to buy some ramen and possibly get some kimchi too for the midnight snack. Such was almost a part of our overnight training, and actually I rather enjoyed the chance to get away for a short while. So I took my merry way down to the village. As usual, on the way was some tombs dotted around, but since I became a soldier and ran into countless of them during training in mountains, I didn't mind at all anymore. I crossed the bridge across a stream, and there was a small village of probably about 20 households. Now the task was locating the village corner shop. For a village of that size, a shop was often run by one of the residents at one corner of their house, often missing a sign or even closed down altogether during the busy summer season. But then often one could still buy something even after the usual business hour, so long I could find it first, that was. Then I saw a man standing far away. What a good luck, I could just ask him. "Excuse me, sir, where's the corner shop here?" I called out. The man didn't say anything, but beckoned as to say to follow him. My mind was busy recounting the shopping list. Ramen, of course, some bottles of soju. Corporal Kim asked for a packet of cigarette. I shouldn't forget some kimchi, that's important. The man walked ahead and I followed, but even though I was sure my walk was faster than his, the distance between us didn't close in. On the contrary, he looked moving further and further away. He even looked back and waved as to tell me to come quicker. I speeded up to catch up, until I realized we were actually going out and away from the village. The man was actually walking into a mountain? Where was he going? Did he live there? A shop in the mountain? Or did we have to go to a neighboring village over the mountain? While my mind was running busy, the man stopped and turned around. Well away from the dim street lamps of the village, all I could see was the dark outline of him under the pale moonlight. And he looked just like an ordinary guy to me. Those few quiet seconds felt like a few minutes. He lifted his arm and beckoned at me again. But I didn't want to follow him anymore. I didn't know if there was a shop or not, but something was telling me I should not go there. My feet instinctively took a few steps back. And then I saw him smiling. Maybe I didn't actually see it, but I was sure I could sense him smiling. And the next moment, he sprinted towards me. I screamed and ran. I didn't even dare to look back. I just ran through the village and up the mountain back to my troop. Senior soldiers were surprised to see me back, soaked in sweat and half out of mind. Some taunted that I didn't bring any supply, but they didn't say anything more once I told them my frantic account. I still wonder what that was, and who the man was. After the boot camp, I was stationed at an engineer corps near the border to North Korea. There I happened to work as an administrator, dealing with papers and numbers regarding running the base. Not because I knew anything about administration, but by sheer chance, as often is the case in the military. The base was situated really out in nowhere, not a sign of civilization as far as eyes could see, apart from the army base. Suddenly cut away from the world, I felt inevitably a bit depressed and isolated, and I tried to overcome it by focusing on doing my job. At that age, I was a bit of an idealist, and my aim starting the military service was in service of the army and my country. How often I was scoffed at by other senior soldiers whenever I told them that propaganda-sounding line. But really, I did my best at my position. I was particularly in charge of keeping the book for fuel and construction material. I literally studied the entire manual to make up for my lack of previous knowledge. I even reached out to a friend who studied architect and asked to recommend books to learn the basics of construction engineering. Every morning, I went out to the transportation battalion 30-40 minutes before the reveille and checked the fuel gauge myself. That way I could calculate exactly how much fuel had to be supplied. After a few weeks of that, we started saving 10 to 15 barrels of oil than before. Officers in charge seemed to be very happy about that, while the soldiers of Transportation Battalion seemed getting more and more hostile. And one early foggy morning, I was down at the garage once again checking the oil gauges. But unlike other mornings, I wasn't alone there. A sergeant of the transport battalion was waiting for me. Being a private, I didn't know anything better and just saluted him. He grinned and said,
"You little bastard! Come and get this!"
What came out from his back was a machete or a jungle knife, and he lifted that knife to strike me. At that very moment, and I don't know how, but the time seemed slowing down. I could see the sergeant lifting the machete in slow motion, slow enough for me to think through. Okay, the knife is too long to clear by stepping back. I'd better step forward and stop his hand. So I did jumped towards him and slapped down his hand, hard enough for the machete to fly across the garage. I guess the entire sequence of events would have taken just a split second in reality. Next moment, the sergeant was on his knees, crying, while I was breathing hard, not quite grasping what just happened. Once the storm passed, the sergeant explained the situation between his sobs. Those military vehicles were old and prone to frequent breakdowns. I don't know how the system worked there, most likely a corruption on the part of the officers, but the officers in charge made soldiers to pay for the parts required for repair out of their pocket. In theory, you could refuse to pay, but if the vehicle was not fixed and ready to go in time, soldiers in charge of the vehicle would be the subject of psychological and emotional bullying.
I'm already giving 3 years of my life to the army for free. I can't ask my poor old parents to pay for the car parts on top of that,
Sergeant said. So he came up with a solution, saving up excess fuel to sell off. It paid for the repair parts as well as an occasional drink party for the battalion. However corrupt, that had been the working model for the battalion until this overzealous private came to ruin it. In the end, this sergeant volunteered to take the bullet for the soldiers in the battalion and solve the issue by getting rid of me. I went to the battalion's barrack to apologize that I didn't know the situation they were in. At first they were cold and hostile, but accepted my earnest apology in the end. It's all a bit sad and desperate story if you think about it. But I still find it amusing how the time slowed down in that second of life and death so that I could save myself. It had never happened before and has never happened since. As an epilogue, in the later days, I made some unrelated mistake and was ordered to make 100 rounds on the drill ground in my full gear as a punishment. Full gear weighs around 30 kilos, and running in the full gear is one of the most dreaded tasks in the military. In that punishing march, I suddenly realized somebody was running with me. It was the sergeant who tried to kill me. He silently kept company the whole time, picking up my helmet or gas mask when they flew off of me, and even carrying my backpack for the last few rounds. He was a good man after all, and I wish him the best wherever he is now. I entered the boot camp in November 2005. In my room were just 3, including myself. It was bitterly cold inside. The night watch was to check on the thermometer in the room and note down as a part of the patrol routine. But the drill sergeant instructed to warm the thermometer with breath if it was too low. Well, the first taste of the absurd world, that is the military. So when we slept, we all buried ourselves in the sleeping bags like a pupa. But one night, our sleep was disturbed by a loud noise. Despite the cold and drowsiness, I had to pop my head out to see what was going on. There was a soldier mate, most likely on the night watch, jumping up and down on the other side of the room, and the heavy combat boots were making the thought. What was he doing? Had he gone mad or what? I told him to quit it, and the other 2 roommates joined in to tell him to stop too. But the night watch carried on. We were too tired, and the outside of the sleeping bag was so cold, so we just rather ignored him and buried our heads in the sleeping bag again. In the morning, we indeed found the damn night watch left dirty footsteps on the floor, and we had to wipe them off, grumbling and wondering about the mad mate once again. We did ask around who were on the night watch the previous night and asked if one of them was the culprit, but they all denied. Why would anybody do such a thing? We must have dreamt it, they all said. But we three all saw it. And what about the footprints? But it was soon forgot in the hectic routine of the boot camp. It was only on the last day at the boot camp that one of the roommates brought it up again.
Remember that mystery jumping man? Wasn't he a bit odd?
He said. It indeed reminded me of how he jumped. You know, usually one would bend his knees or upper body forward to get the momentum to jump up. But that guy just went up and down straight, stiff as a stick. More like a wooden marionette pulled up and down by a string. We could never figure out what he was. But that remains one experience that comes closest to what could be paranormal. When I was a newbie private, a soldier, a corporal, killed himself in my base by blowing his own head. Of course, it created quite a storm. The base packed up everything he left behind, his uniform, boots and personal belongings, and sent them back to his family. He died as a soldier, so he had to have a funeral as a soldier too. Time passed, and a year later, I was now a senior sergeant and was named a squad leader. On the day the corporal died, the officers led a little memorial ritual for the dead with the snacks that was said to be his favorite. That very night, I took the night shift as the orderly officer of the day and went to catch some sleep in the morning. About lunchtime, a junior soldier brought some food for my lunch, but I told him I just wanted to sleep more and he should leave me alone. Not 10 minutes later, my sleep was disturbed once again by the sound of somebody going through his cabinet. I wanted to ignore and pull the blanket over my face. But he was sobbing. It got on my nerves, together with the sharp noises he kept making. I shouted through the blanket. "Oi, I don't know what's up, but I need to sleep. Just leave me be, will you?"
I'm sorry, but I need to look for something,
he said. "Can't it wait? I'll tell other boys to help you later."
I must find it. I couldn't go anywhere without them.
You piece of doo-doo. What is it for, heaven's sake?
My boots, they're gone.
What the? You're joking, are you? Who are you?
Corporal Lee Young-soo.
I couldn't move, covered under the blanket, for a good 5 minutes. Because Corporal E was the soldier who died a year ago. While my heart jumping nearly out of my mouth, I could just silently chant in my mind, Corporal E, please, please." Only when the noise finally stopped, I could dare to peep out of the blanket. A cabinet was left open with all its contents thrown down on the floor. I ran straight to my company master sergeant. He didn't believe my claim at first that I saw a ghost, but after hearing the full story, his face changed. Soon the entire platoon was summoned to discuss the situation. We did pack everything that belonged to the dead soldier and sent them to the family. How could his boots be missing then? The quartermaster managed to get hold of a new pair of combat boots, burnt them, and scattered the ash around the base. But it still took a month till we found out what happened to Corporal E's boots. When he was alive, he kept the new issue of his boots in a pristine condition. And when he died, a soldier nicked them and kept for himself. The soldier who committed the despicable petty theft was none other than the notorious Blue Falcon Sr. By then he was already discharged and back to civilian life, but the company master sergeant called him back to the base and made him apologize to the dead soldier in front of all the others. I hear the same incident repeated a year later after I discharged, but then it never reoccurred since. It remains still a trauma for me, and I hate to hear somebody sobbing to this day. I'm not a shaman, but I see dead people. Unfortunately, spiritual sensitivity is not considered a good enough reason to get an exemption from the military service, so I did my duty. Many military bases are riddled with various ghost stories, but fortunately the base I was stationed to was located in a clean and lofty area, and I could finish my service there without running into unpleasant encounters. Now, finishing the service doesn't mean the nation set you free completely. For the further 8 years, we are still listed to the reserve force. For the first 4 years, we are called in for 3-day military retraining. Next 2 years for 1-day training at the local defense force. And for the last 2 years, no more training, but still remain on the list in case of war. Anyway, this story takes place during my first call to the 3-day reserve force training. For many, it's a nuisance, but having enjoyed a relatively happy military service, I was actually rather happy to taste the terrible army meals again. Though, I must say, it didn't quite go as I pictured. When I arrived at the designated base, the whole place was under major renovation, and we had to sleep in the military tent. But at least the meals were just as nostalgic as I imagined. As for my sixth sense, I didn't see anything particular in the base. A few spirits here and there, but nothing out of ordinary or particularly malicious. Or so I thought until the second day. It was planned to have a field training in the afternoon, but due to heavy downpour, it was switched to indoor lecture. We were led to the assembly hall, and I started sensing something. The building itself was spanking new, but there was something eerie in the air, especially on the grey, rainy day. Once inside, I didn't see anything odd. Could it have been a false alarm? Anyway, the boring lecture started, and everybody started dozing away left, right, and center. I alone, still new and fresh in the reserve force training, stayed awake. The rain kept pouring down, and even with the lights on, it felt dim and damp in the hall. The back wall of the stage was covered with a black curtain. I saw a head poke out from it, followed by another, and then many of them from every corner. Most peculiar thing was, all the faces were young, that of babies. Why on earth so many babies in a military base, I wondered. Even more faces appeared from stage entrance, and then some crawled over to the officer who was giving the lecture, and bit older looking ones ran all around the hall. The clothes they were wearing were clearly not contemporary. The simple coarse cotton shirts and shorts looked more like from the 1950s or possibly earlier. They got terribly noisy, but I would have been the only one who could hear them anyway. Some now gazed curiously into sleeping guys' faces, and some even crawled on them. That must have given them a nightmare. To escape the situation, I pretended to doze off myself. When a ghost finds out that you can see them, they're trying to cling to you. It's all very tiring, but it's especially so with the spirits of children. They behave exactly like living kids. They'll do as they want, and you can't really reason with them. So I'm more wary of spirits of young kids than that of adults. Fortunately, the boring lecture finally came to end, and we went to have dinner. After the day's program finished, I chatted up an assistant trainer, a sergeant near his discharge. I was wondering, do you know when the assembly hall was built?
It's been a few months. Why do you ask?
He said. Were you anyway involved in the construction?
God, I practically built it. Ever since when I was a private, I worked on it.
Really? You should know very well then what on the plot was before the construction.
Nothing special. It was just a low hill.
And nothing like a tomb?
Not that I know of. I don't think there was any tomb on the ground of the base.
After a short silence, the trainer asked tentatively,
Oh, you, happen to be a shaman?
I'm not. What made you think that? I said.
There was one professional shaman who came here for the reserve force training. He mentioned there are lots of ghosts here.
Baby ghosts?
Oh, how do you know that?
Are you sure you didn't find anything odd while digging the foundation of the hole? I asked again.
Nothing special. Well, except for what looked like small white beads. Many of them, actually.
He then lowered his voice and said,
Please don't tell this to others, but one of the trainees sneaked in the hall for a nap and was later found unconscious. He babbled on that he saw a ghost. Are you saying it's really haunted?
Well, I didn't want to scare poor soldiers on duty unnecessarily, so I just told him there was nothing major and he should just avoid going there alone at night. My guess is the plot of the hall must have once been a burial pit of the dead kids. In the Confucian past, dying before one's parents was considered one of the biggest sin one could commit to one's parents. So people didn't give proper burial for kids that died young. Their tombs didn't have the mound to mark that it was a tomb. In the time of famine or plague, even that was a luxury, and they were just buried in a mass grave. Such custom continued into 20th century, especially through the difficult times of Korean War and the terrible poverty that followed. Judging by the clothes the baby ghosts were wearing, I assume they died about the time too. And the white beads found during the construction of the hall might have been little teeth of them. I wish I could have done something to console them and pray for their souls, but being in the military base, I could not. Leaving a few candies by the assembly hall was all I could do before I left. "5 years ago, I was serving in the army and just became a sergeant. In my base, very close to the border to North Korea, Night watch included a stationary one that stayed at the checkpoint and a mobile one that kept patrolling along the fence. That night, I was on the mobile night watch with my junior Corporal Park for the 3 to 5 in the morning slot. Normally nothing much happens, and it's more or less an involuntary midnight stroll of a sort. So we were nearing the end of the usual patrol when we saw a person from afar. At that hour of the day, there shouldn't be anybody moving around in the base. Could it be an orderly officer? But that couldn't be, considering he wasn't in his gears or carrying a rifle. Fortunately, the mystery guy seemed not to have noticed us in the dark, and we could carefully approach. The guy took the narrow path up the hill. It only added to our suspicion because that path didn't lead to anything other than the Buddhist temple. Bigger military bases usually have a church and temple facilities inside for the soldiers. Oh, could he be really some intruder from North Korea? I said.
Please, Sergeant, don't say that,
Corporal Buck said. I thought it was yet too early to call for a backup, so decided to keep following.
Load your rifle,
I said to Corporal Park. Because the base was close to North Korea, the routine watches carried live bullets, albeit the first 2 in the magazine were blanks. Didn't realize at first, but the mystery guy was carrying something. A bag? A sack? A bundle? Soon he stopped by the temple, took out a shovel from his sack, and started digging. I couldn't think any rational reason for any normal person to be digging at that hour and situation. He must be a North Korean spy or something. He should be planting a bomb to explode for the Buddhist service the following day. My mind was busy with flying imaginations. Whatever he was, I would win a prize vacation, or who knows, a medal should I catch him, I thought. I'm going to challenge him. Stay behind, keep aim at him, and shoot the blank bullets if he attacks, I told my junior, and approached the guy. Stop, or I'm gonna shoot! The man stopped shoveling in the middle. Raise both hands! Aye, it's me, the man said. Who is it? I said to move. It's me, Lieutenant Kim of the supply company. I knew Lieutenant Kim well, so I directed the torchlight to the guy's face. He promptly hid his eyes with an arm, probably because the sudden light blinded him. But then I could still see his frame and voice were not that of Lieutenant Kim I knew. I can't identify you. Drop the shovel and drop to the ground, I shouted. What the heck are you talking about? I repeat, drop the shovel and drop to the ground. I'll fire if you resist. Son of a bitch, he shouted and aimed his shovel at me. But, bang! Corporal Bach, who was watching from behind, hidden, fired his rifle. Well, it was a blank shot, but it was just as loud as a real thing, and it rang all around the base. The guy dropped the shovel and started running away. I finally radioed to ask for a backup and informed where we were and where the guy was heading to. By the time we chased him all the way to the rear gate, we had already fired all 3 blank shots between me and Corporal Bach. Should we fire the live bullet now? But thankfully, the backup moved quickly and was already waiting for the guy by the gate. He was quickly subdued by the backup force, who clubbed him down. His identity revealed under the torchlight was an officer of our base, but from a different company, and certainly not Lieutenant Kim. But then why did he run away? I remembered the sack he was carrying and mentioned it to the officer in charge. The sack was promptly retrieved, and the faces of soldiers carrying it were blue. Meantime, the orderly officer joined and ordered to reveal the content, but the soldier who was carrying the sack said,
"Sir, it's something too serious to check out here. We'd better do it back in the office."
So we did indeed, in presence of the officers, I and Corporal Park. They were body parts, arms and legs to be precise. I almost threw up at the sight. Military police investigation and hellish interrogation followed after another that lasted for days on. The conclusion was, the culprit tried to borrow money from his girlfriend, but repeatedly rejected. He suspected the girlfriend's mother was influencing her from behind and took grudge. And one day, he got drunk and killed the mother. He cut up the body and thought inside a military base could ironically be a safe place to conceal them. So he took the lighter parts to bury them at the quietest corner of the base. But such was his luck that he was spotted by us. I didn't get any prize, vacation, or a medal. We were just sternly warned to keep our mouths sealed. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. I did my military duty myself, and I must say I didn't have a good time there. Another reason I don't read stories from the military that often, despite their prevalence in terms of proportion. So forgive me if I tend to focus more on the negative side of the military life. Might some of my viewers also have experience in the military? If you have, it would be most interesting how the stories from Korean military compare to your experience. If you enjoyed my work, please give it a big thumbs up and a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. I read mainly paranormal stories on this channel, but also sometimes real crime or even just plain bizarre and amusing stories too, all straight from Korean web communities. If you want stories that you most likely have never heard from anywhere else, my channel is for you. If you'd support me more directly, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account, the link's in the description, or there's also a super thanks option here on YouTube for a small donation. Thank you. Until the next, stay safe and take care.